I'm gone. I'm in the garage this morning to do a little more work on the rowboat that I have been building for the last several years.
The idea for building a boat came from a kayaking trip we had on a local lake. It was a gorgeous day, and our dogs were enjoying jumping in the water and swimming from one kayak to the other. Of course, this meant that every time we pulled the dog back on board, they would shake off the water and get us and everything else wet. The subsequent shivering got us to desiring a boat that was big enough for all of us and had decks at the front and the back where the dogs could shake off. So I looked for a boat that fit our wants and settled on building a cosine-weary rowboat. This boat design is stable, lightweight, an excellent rower, and has enough room to avoid most of the dog spray. I planned to build it as time permitted and would add the custom dog decks we wanted. I began by purchasing full-size form patterns from Tendercraft Boats and proceeded to get as much information as I could about the building of wood strip boats. I used resources such as Rip, Strip, and Row by J.D. Brown. I used a book called Building Strip Plank Boats by Nick Shade, and the notes from the Laughing Loon Shop Tips by Rob Max. So the construction of this boat began by building a 16-foot long strongback. It's the rigid and level surface for the form. I then glued each of the patterns that I got onto a 3/4 inch thick hardboard and cut them out to make the stanchion. I was able to pick up some 3/4 inch clear western red cedar, and I set up my saw so that I could rip the boards into strips that were consistently a little less than 1/4 inch thick. I put the first strip on the bottom, which is actually the rail of the boat since the boat is built upside down on the form. I attached the strip to the form with temporary staples at each stanchion, adding strips to both sides at the same time. A false stem at the bow and the transom at the stern served as the starting and stopping points for the strips. I fit and glued the second strip to the first one, added the staples, and once the glue was set, I fit and glued the next strip the same way, and so on. There are approximately 50 strips from one rail to the other at the very middle of the boat. The lighter color strips that I added for contrast are poplar. So once all the strips were in place, I removed all the staples, then scraped, faired, and sanded the whole exterior. This process seemed to take longer than any other process in the entire boat build. Next, I put on the exterior a coat of clear epoxy and followed this with fiberglass cloth that overlapped in the center, and then another coat of epoxy. After thorough curing, I sanded the exterior smooth and systematically applied 3 more coats of epoxy. It is pretty amazing how well the cloth disappeared into the beautifully glossy epoxy. Next, I soaked and bent the stem, fit the keel, made the 2 parts one, and epoxied the whole assembly to the hull. I then removed the hull from the form, turned it right side up, and repeated the scraping, fairing, sanding, and epoxy process on the inside. The next step is to add the top rails, and it begins by adding this outside rail, which is glued directly to the hull. The challenging part for this was that both outside pieces had to be glued together at the front, held together at the front, and then the whole thing, both sides and all, epoxied to the existing hull. Now I'm on to adding the decks. The front deck is made a lot like the hull. It's very thin. You can see how light it is, very thin and light. And it will be
set into the hull about on there in some framing. Hopefully you can see that. And that'll be a good place for Rusty to look out over the front of the boat. The inside deck will be removable to save weight, and it'll set up on these cross pieces that I'm beginning to fit and form. So each cross piece is set at 2 feet, and I will scribe them into the hull. They will be glued into the hull with epoxy. This boat is really strong. As you can see, it's very light and easy to lift right now, and I want to keep it that way as much as possible. So that's where I'm at in building the rowboat, and it's getting to where the project is really fun. I do hope that this summer I'll be able to get the boat out on the water, start to test it out, and start to begin to explore the various bodies of water around the area here in Southern Oregon.